Unfortunately, it became culture versus business when it's not. It's science versus business. And, science and technology should not be our enemy. I advocate for our children and what will be available from them years to come. That should be the conversation.
Welcome to Richard Haw's YouTube channel, which looks at what we can do today to make Hawaii Island a more sustainable place to live, so our children and grandchildren and their grandchildren won't be priced out of here and will be able to stay in Hawaii and live good lives here. Today, Richard and I are talking to Desmon Haumea. Des is a Hilo boy raised in Keaukaha and Puna. He's a member of the Royal Order of Kamehameha and the Polynesian Voyaging Society. He is a wayfinder who's traveled on the voyaging canoe Hokulea. He's an educational specialist at schools, an indigenous traditional healer, and a musician who has traveled around the world with his band. That's a lot, Des. My goodness. Welcome.
The Royal Order of Kamehameha is a benevolent society. And also with the Order of Kamehameha, we do governance and political strategies and things like that. So get the benevolent side, they do benevolency. On the Order of Kamehameha, we do governance and working on energy.
Great.
Among other things.
Des, I know you have a wide range of subjects that you talk about in your expertises. What I would like to talk about is energy, and specifically the energy that we have here on Hawaii Island, which is geothermal. Very few places in the world actually has it. So I was curious as to your take on geothermal, how it could be used and what the benefits are.
Yeah, I got turned on to geothermal years ago when we went to New Zealand and Japan too, of course. We went to these people who are hosting us, and being from the islands, we get busy. We help cooking and cutting vegetables and preparing food. And one thing that we noticed was, besides the appliances in the kitchen, there was no stove or no oven or no cooking device, appliance. So everything was prepared. You don't question, you just go along to belong, right? Yeah, where's the stove? So we went out in the back and there was a hale, a house, which was their cookhouse. And everything was cooked on geothermal. It just blew me away. The geothermal, the energy they got from that, powered the home. We got to watch video, charge our telephones. So that was, was a surprise to me. So I became an advocate of that. But also being on the ocean and depending on the natural elements, I really focus on renewable energy. Just trying to find solutions as far as our children going to be facing with tomorrow, let alone years from now. We agreed on one point that our children is our kupuna, our ancestors in training. What we teach them will help them be not only leaders, but good citizens in our community where they're productive and everything surrounds energy. Everything we do, from our food security to industry, many, many facets. So I was really looking into renewable energy and, wind energy, wave energy, solar. Of course, on the VA, we have solar. It's natural resources that's readily available. For me, geothermal is the highest priority right now.
What do you think should happen next regarding geothermal?
There's so much oppositions from the local community at numerous levels. I think the problem, and then with the way the government is run, through funding, the process, and I've done that several times, where you submit a RFP, you get funding from whether it's federal, state, or county. You have to propose this business plan. What are you going to do in the next whatever period this funding is for? Then you get the funding, and all of a sudden you have to do outreach. You got to check boxes. I did this. And one of those requirements is to make sure you get out there. The problem is it's done backwards. When you do your business plan, you got to have people in the community at the table while you're developing this business plan to get this funding. Because by the time the community finds out what's going on, it's a done deal. And they had no voice. And I think if we move into this new, daily dollar short, we should have done this from statehood. You should have included the people. And just so that we can avoid these confrontations, I attended a geothermal meeting, and there was, shouting and, really raised the voices and calling out names. And that's not correct for who we are here in Hawaii. Everybody has a voice. And that's the problem. They control the voice. I think our next step is to really get involved in education. I belong to sustainable energy. My biggest thing is, and as a teacher, as an educational specialist, is to get out there and teach. Like Mauna Kea, we had this great protest, but it divided the people because some people want CMP. And unfortunately, it became culture versus business when it's not. It's science versus business. And, science and technology should not be our enemy. I've lived and breathed in the ancestral realm out there behind me. I've been there when all you have is who's on the canoe and the natural elements. And you have to live by that or you die, or you go nowhere. Yeah. There's a saying that Papa Mao that I teach my students with, actually two. One is you swim as fast as the slowest swimmer. You take care of each other, and that's the metaphor, and then there's a kauna. The other one is you cannot do anything about the wind, but you can surely adjust your sails. But you still need to sail. Getting back to geothermal, I think, and not necessarily geothermal, it's about bringing a discussion to the table about energy. Yeah. Unfortunately, Hawaiian Electric, they're a privatized company. So we're dealing with another corporate structure. In New Zealand, there's a management, so it's not overused or abused, but the government doesn't own utilities. It's a shared partnership. They work with each other as far as energy is concerned. I got geothermal. You need geothermal, but you still have your fossil fuel, but sometimes I'm going to need that. My understanding is, there's opposition to PGV, but you got to look through things through a different lens. Right now, we just tunnel vision looking, the poisonous gas, and it's terrible. We're going against Pele. And, I spoke once, and of course I got, I love it. Because, people are going to hate you. Well, they can stand in line because, what I do is, I have to do it for our children, regardless. I stood up and I said, well, maybe it's a gift from Pele. I don't know. I don't think anybody can argue with that. I don't think. You asked me about next step is to bring our people together, put them at the table. So when we do a business plan, how is going to affect them, us, you, rather than how it's going to be a great value to the corporate structure. We already know what that is. We already know what the CEO of HICO is making per year, and yet they're going to be raising prices. So if you want to look at it from that lens, and for Richard and I, we talked about it. It's about, like I said, it's for our children. When I started this, we stood on the side of the road. My daughter was 6 and my son was 4, waving signs. But there was nobody else at that time. I just found out about it. Had the people known about it that time, we could have done something about it. We're literally left in the dark. Then all of a sudden, the light comes on and we're going to do this for you. We're here to help you. We're going to make life better. So it's how we're going to bring everybody to the table.
What would you say to all these people who protest geothermal and don't get it? What would you say if you had a direct line to them?
Oh, I would say, let's take a step back from how we view that. Step back. And really, engage your critical thinking. Okay, we have this. You don't want it, but look at it from a different lens. What's the advantage of that? Because right now, the way we're looking at it, we're fighting each other. It becomes a fight, and it shouldn't be a fight. We should find solutions. So I would say that directly to these people that, their fault for causing this. And it's our fault for behaving like that, yelling and screaming. That's not who we are. For me to post that on social media, our children is seeing that. They're learning who we are. And basically, okay, if you want to be that, then good for you. But I cannot stand with you. Yeah. But if we look at this from a different view, the value of it, it may far outweigh the way you think about geothermal from this lens. I don't know, because that's a personal choice. But for me, I have to look at it. Because right now, in this view, it's not working. We're fighting, you have people come with their culture, and I understand that. It's that generational trauma, yeah? So, okay, be mad, be pissed off, yell and everything, great. But for me, I got to find a solution to that. And we cannot be in this situation if we're going to only just, with blinders. We need to open our eyes, because there's a great world out there. I've seen them.
Des, I'm not as versed as you are, but one thing that strikes me is that back in the old days, the Hawaiians never used to have a written language. They didn't have all this fancy science that we have today, but they figured it out by humans were no more important than other living things. Hence, they have the bird people, the tree people, and these kinds of things. So if you're not more important than any other living thing, then you got to work together. That's kind of like the basis for how things actually work. So it was a very simple way of looking at things, but they balanced the environment against, what they had. And so what came of that was what they call reciprocity today, which is
Yeah.
you help me, I help you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so depending on where you are, up the hill or down in the valley or in the ocean or whatever. So I help you, you help me, and that's the basis of aloha compared to what now we do a transaction costs $10, but I like change, instead of the old style. Yeah, just help each other out and whatever. It just makes me feel like the ancient Hawaiians actually had them figured out.
I totally agree with what you said. We have no value unless we participate in this changing world as part of the ecosystem. We look at ecosystem like, oh yeah, this is what we part of that. So when you have these natural resources like geothermal, we are part of that process. We shouldn't separate us just because of our personal agenda. So I said science and technology should not be our enemy. If you're going to talk about geothermal, tell me why. Instead of poisonous gases, no. Tutupele, great. But where's the evidence? I like to see the evidence. I was raised, I got to hug them. I got to see them. I got to taste it. And right now going to those geothermal, I don't taste it. I only taste hate. But what you mentioned about our ancestors, I always say, when they came 1,500 years ago to these islands, trial and error, yeah, they had to do a lot to get to that point where, that star takes us to Hawaii. That wind blows in a certain direction, not all year. So I got to watch the weather. But I'm getting it. I always say that if our ancestors on their way over here for the first time, if something broke, if they had duct tape, they would use the duct tape. Or they would use the rubber from the bicycle to quick repair, yeah? So like in geothermal, we got to teach ourselves of what value is that? Does that value outweigh my cultural view? I don't know.
Seems like our cousins in New Zealand have figured that out already. Too bad more people here can't go and experience that.
I think we have to understand it. We part of the environment. So in their history, their oral history, they created geothermal to these two sisters from Hawaii. Interesting, yeah? And I heard like, they didn't know the name of these two sisters of fire.
Oh.
So these guys' ancestors called through their karakia, called. So these sisters came from, at that time, the name was Hawaii Kinui, the big Hawaii. They really honor us. They came to New Zealand and they brought fire. And with the water they have, they created geothermal.
And just from a practical point of view, you would say, Kilauea is very active. It can happen tomorrow. You don't know. Mauna Loa is the same way. It could go anywhere down the slope. So from a risk management point of view, you would want to kind of move away to spread your risk toward Mauna Kea, toward Kohala Mountain. Even, for example, like Pipikeo Point. Pipikeo Point happened because if you're in Hilo and you're looking out, you can see the cinder cones. So if there's cinder cones over there, there must be heat underneath there. But our technology and our thinking is so far behind that we in the narrative, you're hearing, people are drilling this and that. Nowadays they don't drill. They just send electronic waves down to detect stuff. They don't drill, and I hear in this last discussion, they drill all over the place. No. So we're way behind. We need to catch up.
And funny you mentioned that. So we had PGV on top looking, and so there's the different cinder cones. And the lady goes, "Oh, there's steam coming out of there." So I go, "Could you utilize that?" She goes, "Oh yeah, just drop right over it, and you produce it without drilling because you already see it." I go, "That's simple." Yeah, I look at Mike. Wow, I mean, it's there.
We'd like to have you tell us how the subject applies to you as well as to Desmond, how you folks work together and stuff like that, because I find your story really compelling.
We have our own medical clinic balancing Western nutrition with traditional.
Food sustainability for our health and wellness and our environment. So having clean water, having energy to produce our food, to live a healthy life. I mean, that is the foundation for our connection to this important topic. When we talk about a lot of our major issues, especially with health, education or the lack thereof is always the challenge.
So what you're saying, shows that it's a big picture. It's not very narrowly focused. Like when you talk about food security comes with being able to grow food enough to feed the people. And here we are in Hawaii. We provide about 15% of the food we eat. The rest of it is shipped in with fossil fuel, which is declining in the future. But then we have geothermal here. So, it's all tied together. The food security, the energy, and everything you mentioned. How do you see that we can pull everybody together to be moving in the same direction? Because we're not there, yeah?
I agree that this is kind of like our biggest challenge. A lot of us just don't know. A lot of us lack the education that there is even this issue. The kids are in school, the families are working. I think that's a large majority of our population. And I feel like we really need to be providing this education to our employers to then have them share it with their employees, to then have them share it with families. So there needs to be this foundation put in the systems that we work in. And then we need to be taught how to confidently multiply that education in all of our groups that we're involved in, right? So many of us are just in survival mode and have been kind of throughout COVID. We're kind of the worst health we've seen, and the projection for our kids is the worst. So we have to bring it to an important issue that all of us need to play a role in.
I've been talking to several people that do food production, kind of simple food production, but they're making hubs. This group of people can, in this physical location, can have a food hub here and another one here and another one here. And that is really fascinating, because if you can get that going and you can show your kids that it can work, and if somehow we can, like you were mentioning, education, put it into our educational system, we really got to start with the kids. How can we get it into the educational system? Have you thought about it that way too?
Yes, if we're going to see action within all these systems, it, I think, traditionally comes from the top down, like, hey, this is a really big topic. We have to start putting this in.
Our kids used to come home from school hungry. And, we had this conversation with a grandma, because we working 3 jobs. So grandma usually picks up the kid, takes them home, give them soda, chips, just and go in front of the TV, do your homework. And so they're eating this food 5 days a week after school. What I'm getting at is how come we're the most obese nation on this planet? We fat, we don't eat right, that's why. And that's where all the diseases come. So, and all of this stuff is related to energy. Like Stacy said, it got to come from the top. And that's why I said, if our ancestors had duct tape for the canoe, they would use them. There's value in that, that's why. I don't understand it, but I know if I put this duct tape over that part of the sail, I can sail for another 3-4 days, rather than stopping, trying to repair for 3-4 days. So to become part of the environment, part of the ecosystem, we have to move with the ecosystem, not destroy it.
I'm struck by all of this you're discussing and the idea that we've got to start with the kids. And something that you said earlier, Des, about the story in the Maori tradition that 2 Hawaiian goddesses brought fire to New Zealand, So, of course, we're thinking Pele and Hi'iaka, right? But they don't know the names, but we know the names. And what if kids were taught that? Then they start growing up seeing the value. Oh, and look what they did with it in New Zealand, I think that's fascinating.
Okay. And so they didn't know the names, but they had their own names for them.
Oh.
They named, and now they have this, it's going to be part of my curriculum when I go back in teaching in August. So when they go up there and they look at it, they make a connection now. Oh, Uncle They said they went to New Zealand, gave on fire, So now they have this greater understanding. Instead of just looking at an eruption, they can actually tell their parents that. So it all comes into play. So I say, we're part of the ecosystem. We are the tree. We are the geothermal, we are the electricity, everything, because we brought that into our home. And that's what we're teaching our kids. But if you start teaching our kids, and there's another energy source,
Yeah. Along the same lines, looking into the future, somewhat, artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is getting really more and more and more, yeah? So the basis for artificial intelligence is electricity. So if it is electricity and you can find a source of electricity that's cheaper than everybody else, then you'd be leading the future. Here we are in Hawaii with our kids leaving home because they're trying to find someplace else cheaper to live because the expenses are too high. So if we had an energy source that was stable and 24/7 and free, the geothermal is going to be around for a million years. No matter what happens to fossil fuel, the geothermal heat is still going to cost the same.
Right.
So which will give our people an advantage. Just
Yeah.
kind of looking into the future somewhat, yeah?
To answer Leslie's first question, what would be my next step? So right now, because we're so divided on geothermal, I'm an advocate for renewable energy, which is the most efficient, of value to the family and our kids, and what is accessible without exuberant fees to get it. In other words, we paying so much money for electricity. I mean, this family moves away. If they came to Puna, and Puna had all geothermal, all of our building material, all of the machines, all feeds off of geothermal, the cost of homes would diminish, the cost of food would diminish, and now the cost of living, the cola would be affordable, and that's looking ahead. If you're going to depend on fossil fuel, and that would be my next step, that's great. How long that going to last? How long are we going to be able to provide this type of energy for our kids to come back home? Because they got to come home. Right now, they benefit in Las Vegas right now. That should be our taxations. The other one is the leader. Who's going to lead us? All of us. We have no one. So, it's so much issue that piles onto this anxiety, this stress for our parents especially. I think the narrative should be renewable energy. What's the most efficient? What's the most cleanest? What is of greater value to the family? All of these things. And of course, cultural sensitivity, but they need to work together. They need to understand the both sides of the fence and stop dividing us.
You know what I sense in this group discussion here? We need to get a group of people together that think like you folks, to pull everybody together to move forward, because right now we don't have that. Yeah, you're talking the same thing. Stacy's talking the same thing. I'm talking the same thing. We just got to pull ourselves together, see who else can be in this group and kind of build them up. Yeah, I don't know how, but I mean, I feel like we've got something. The potential is great.
Yeah, I think somebody needs to be at the point of the spear to get up in front and say what we're saying, or say what I'm saying. And I've been approached to do that. I don't mind doing that. Either we stand up for our children that's in the womb. Yeah, we're already failing, and you gotta fail before you find success. Well, the failure continues. Geothermal, the failures continue because we're still divided. Mauna Kea divided us. So many Hawaiian issues. We have to stop that, not stop, but kind of get away from that. And let's talk about everybody. The Native Hawaiians need everybody, and everybody needs the Native Hawaiian. We're the host culture. So you cannot turn your back on us just because you're Japanese, Chinese, it doesn't matter. We need each other. We hosted you when they came. We adopted their culture. I still take off my shoes or slippers at the door. That's not Hawaiian. But so we follow each other's culture, and I think the cultural base, and you have those other ethnic groups. You even have Hawaiians that wants, I would say, renewable energy. Like it's at the top of the list right now is geothermal. But I don't like come across like, oh, I'm all geothermal. I advocate for our children and what will be available from them years to come.
Yeah.
That should be the conversation. Oh, you can do all this. Yeah, great. But so we're going to leave them with this fighting, this disagreement as humans. We're part of the ecosystem. We're not higher than, we're part of it. We're part of this growth. Because like you said, in a few years, gonna be gone. All these natural resources will still be here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today. That was an interesting discussion, and we thank you for adding your experience and perspectives to the conversation. And thank you everyone for watching. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Richard Hawes Vlog. Ahui ho.
Hey.
Ahui ho.